Hey, we are streaming now. Great. Hopefully, it'll actually go into the right place. I stream in so many different places that occasionally we end up going to the wrong place, and that's no bueno because you don't know where it goes in the internet here. So, anyways, we are streaming to my channel. Yay! So, we're gonna be talking hopefully tonight about how we balance religious freedoms and what harms caused by some aspects of religion. Now, this is a continuation of a topic that Shannon Q had been discussing somewhat with various people somewhere along the lines of the harm that is generated by religiosity more than anything else, right? And this has also been going on with Friended Forever, aka Adam. He might be joining us. He says that he would like to come in, so I said fine. Actually, I invited him earlier, but I kind of like to get a dialogue on this because I'm having a decision in my head, I guess, between balancing what I believe to be correct in the sense that we need to have some kind of religious freedom, right? The anti-theists out there, the militant anti-theists say that, we don't want religion. Now, not many of them, matter of fact, probably very few, if any, go around saying, well, we need to abolish religion. That's just not going to happen. And I would be very much against that. But there are militant people out there that does that. Now, I don't think that that's going to be what the topic's about. I really don't want it to address that kind of far approach to this challenge of saying, okay, we have to have freedoms in society. And I am kind of generating it around America because I'm American, but I think it's applicable worldwide. But we know that there are harmful aspects of religion. Shannon Q, again, has been talking about A and B Christian counseling services, which I believe is a complete and utter scam. Katie Polson from Without a Crystal Ball has been talking about the harms created by religiosity and parents having kids die on them because of this. So I wanted to get a feedback on your from your guys, because I'm not an anti-theist in the regards that I don't think that we should abolish religion, obviously. But should there be a push to kind of lead people away from organized religion? Should religion be something that is in the house rather than in these massive churches that are like 2 to 3 to 1 to every school nowadays? And again, this is something that has changed at the societal level, right? This is not something that I'm saying we need to implement, but is there something to be said by, hey, there's just too much religiosity. There's too much damage being caused by these things. There's too much death. There's too many people doing atrocities in the name of Jesus or their beliefs. And is this something that belief should be at home rather than, at the forefront of everything? We have a society now that's getting very technologically advanced. And in order to have further advancements, do you think that moving away from organized religion, moving away from religion as a culture, should be more just set into the household? Let people believe what they want, obviously, but if not have their beliefs affect politics as much, because that encroachment on political belief and religious beliefs are where I start to see the problem. When we have a vice president who thinks that the earth is 7,000 years old, I foresee an issue with that, right? That kind of stuff. So anyways, anybody can come in here. I do have the video link in the video description. You have to be approved. Your video is turned off as you come in, so you can't really do anything. And I have to know who you are. And I will be checking out everybody who comes in before I bother to show you. And it won't be even with video. So I do have a bunch of people in here, but none of them have their cameras on. So you're not seeing any of them. Can one person at least have their camera on?
I don't think I can get my rear-facing camera on, so
well, not they have to look at me the entire time. All right. Okay. So I got Hellbow Heathen. I got Caleb. I got Good Reverend of Dudism. I got Mr. Brass, and I got Anskar. Anybody else wants to come in? Be my guest. So I think there's only one person in here that really is a theist that I can say of. That would be Mr. Brass, right? And Good Reverend, you don't count, even though you're a reverend.
Well, my religion is rather bullshit, so yeah, I don't really count. Plus, okay. I'm not a theist, as we discussed the other night. So,
Mr. Brass, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. So, what do you think? I mean, you're kind of more of a moderate theist. I mean, you're not evangelistic, and you're certainly not what I consider to be a Christian.
Yeah, definitely not a Christian at all.
Yeah. So, where do you place yourself, and where do you want to draw the line on? Should we have religious freedoms to the extent we have them, or should they be reined in a little bit more? I mean, we can't do certain things in the name of religious freedom, right? You can't have certain kinds of animal sacrifice. You can't, do bloodletting. that kind of stuff. So should we increase those things and say, look, we just don't want this in society any longer because of the dangers?
Um, I do agree that there are certain aspects of religion that are harmful that we do need to work on with it. Probably the most noticeable harm that I really can think of off the top of my head would be with homosexuality. I think that's probably the most noticeable harm that it's doing in
And
terms of
is that
health.
regarded as far as like the narrative that it's sinful and therefore there's this
It's
push
not
by
more of
religion?
that. It's not more of that, but it's actually, legitimately trying to discriminate against gay people, trying to harm them physically. That's what I think needs to stop. Um, I don't so much like mind someone having their opinion on certain people. I don't like obviously I'm not homophobic or nothing like that. I like gay people and stuff. I just think that I would be happy with tolerance, um, as long as it doesn't get to the point of just harming someone physically.
But
Um,
where do we end that tolerance? Look, at we don't have tolerance for people committing crimes in the name of religion, right? And abuse
well,
and
yeah,
things of that nature are crimes. But for some reason, we kind of look a different way when we see things like marital rape, when we see things like um, well, I hate to say a circumcision because we're going to be talking about it another time, and I do want to readdress that issue. But bizarre forms of circumcision, like actually like the moil, putting the mouth under genitalia and sucking the blood or something. I find that
oh yeah,
disturbing, right? I find that to be very disturbing, even though it's a cultural thing, and I'm Jewish. But I'm not. I don't see in a modern day society how that's something that is relevant to religion. And if God exists, I don't think He gives a damn about these types of archaic practices, right? So as a society, should we push for an elimination of them, either one legally or two just culturally by saying this is not acceptable practice any longer?
I would think culturally would be a better approach because, like, if you've ever looked at a society that's actively, like, legally tried to impose it, generally it's only made the problem worse. Because, like, let's look at, for example, China, for example. They have active laws that, and they try to go out of their way to get religion out of China. But what they've done is that they've pushed religion like Christianity underground, and it's grown. So I find like if you make a system where you're actively, where you're through a legal perspective trying to silence them, you might end up just pushing it underground and making it build up stronger.
That's a legitimate
Uh,
concern. People will probably continue their religious practices in more of an underground way because people that have these, I'm going to call them bizarre religious practices, they're going to find a way to do them. If they have animal sacrifice or something like that, they're going to find a way to do them. Yeah, Ansgar, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I think there's a big difference between outlawing a religion entirely and outlawing a practice that we see as barbaric and, archaic. By that standard, by that metric of it'll just go underground, should we legalize female genital mutilation? Should we legalize bloodletting because, oh, people are just going to do it anyway? I mean, I think there is a point where you have to find some kind of a limit where you say, no, I'm sorry, this is objectively doing nothing but harm, no good. We can't allow people to do this just because they believe their God wants them to do it.
Yeah,
well,
I'm okay with that too. I think that there might be a
uh,
chance of them going underground, but even then, it still stems it in some degree, and then you can go after them another way. So I don't think that the pushback that if we do something legality wise, that they're just going to go underground and it's going to make the matter worse. I don't think it's going to make it worse, Brass.
if I also may say, like with the whole bloodletting thing, that's actually not really much of a religious thing. If you want to trace that back, that goes all the way to Galen from Greece, um, where they had this belief of the four humors,
Mm-hmm.
where I can't name them off the top of my head, but basically the idea was that they would figure out, like, it was a medical practice that Galen came up with and Christians later developed. They kind of
Yeah.
got the idea, they took it from them.
There's also ritual bloodletting, though, from different religious
Well, I mean, there's
cultures
a
that have
difference.
nothing to do with the medical. application of religious bloodletting. You
Well, I
know,
mean,
I
that's how
mean,
we got it in America.
well, yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean,
we're
even
going to tell
circumcision
about,
hails back to a blood sacrifice.
well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a distinction we have to make. Like in America, the bloodletting was medical things, which not Thomas Jefferson, George Washington actually partially died because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Um,
that's what I'm saying. I mean, should we allow these things, even though they are religious cultural practices?
well, I mean, that wasn't bloodletting wasn't initially. It was a faulty medical thing that we
No, I
sort of
get that, and they still, and in some cases, they still use leeches medically for various reasons, right? But
yes,
under
I had to make
modern
a
understanding
distinction.
of how we can actually use them with some kind of
Well,
actual
yeah, there's some
utility.
there's some times when like accidentally back then they could help someone, like if they have a clot in their leg or something that might help a little
Mhm.
bit. But outside of that, you were a lot of people like it was funny in the book I was reading on the Middle Ages about this, where they said people were actually better off praying than actually going to the doctor at times because the best thing you get is bloodletting, and that would make matters worse. Um, so, but yeah, it was. I have always had to make a distinction because sometimes people attribute things to religion that aren't actually religion, but they're more cultural and maybe they stem from bad practices that we've initially had. Um, like I think that there are some practices that we do need to uh, I think with like gay people, I think there's modernity and the culture is generally getting more accepting of them. I think probably maybe within a couple generations, it's obviously homophobia is still going to be around, just like how racism is still around.
Well, yeah, but we had to have laws to do that, though, right? I mean, it did take the implementation. People don't realize when I talk about my study, right? It's not really a studying problem. When I have a speech impediment, I really do. There's certain words that I just cannot pronounce, and
Implementation.
implementation. Yes. See, I can eventually get it right, but it's unfortunately when I'm in the conversation, my brain and mouth have a disconnect a lot, and it's certain words that I just cannot formulate the consonant and the vowel properly. And I've been talking about this lately because it's been coming up as an issue, and I never really thought I had to talk about it before, but unfortunately, it's coming to the forefront. But it's nothing that I'm ashamed of. It's just in my past, right? It's just something that I've had to deal with all my life. But there's a real reason why I say that there are certain words that I have a very difficult time enunciating, and people, of course, call into question your knowledge when you can't formulate very easy words. But whatever.
I
So
was,
what are you gonna do?
I
Well, this is
mean,
why I'm never gonna be a radio
I
star, right?
I
there's
thought
no problem,
debris was
Steve.
pronounced debris until I was like 20. So
I mean, no problem, Steve. You know me. I've talked to you about that too with me, Steve. I have um, I have Asperger's autism. I've had a horrible speech impediment for my entire life, and I've basically gotten to the I'm obviously better than I used to be, and I got treatment for it.
Yeah, and people go and they get treatment for these things, and it's a lifelong process. But anyways, I don't want to focus too much on that. I just want people to notice that I am very self-aware of when there's certain words like implementation. I can say fine now, right? But there are just times when my brain and mouth just cease to function together, and I just can't pronounce certain words. But anyways, so back on topic. What about the non-egregious stuff as far as, well, not as egregious because these are egregious things. I don't want to say they're not egregious, but for example, nobody was going around saying that you can't teach kids about creationism, right? I don't think we could ever make a law for that because that's, unfortunately, people have the right to teach what they want. However, um, should we make it more of a cultural thing where that type of teaching is harmful and put it out there that this is a harmful teaching? Again, going back to Shannon and her, A and B Christian counseling thing, it's a harmful thing, right? So what could we do as a society since we can't make legal things on this? We can't say that you cannot teach your kids about this stuff. You cannot do certain things. You have to have some kind of religious freedom. So what do we do as a society without becoming anti-theist to say, look, this shit is bad. This shit is wrong. This is harming kids. We need to make it stop.
I would say comedy. I think that most people don't do a lot of learning, but comedy is a great anesthetic to bad ideas in the culture in general. If it becomes socially acceptable to laugh and mock certain ideas as just stupid, then they become fringe ideas. And fringe ideas is what, I mean, we'll never get rid of them, but fringe ideas is where we want them to be. You know, you bring up that something like ancient aliens, and most people are going to laugh at you, and that's a good thing. You know, and I think that making these bad ideas laughable, comical, I think that's a net positive for the culture.
No, I don't mind mocking them. I mean, some things I believe we can mock, right? I'm not against mocking like young Earth creationism as flat Earth. I don't think it's beneficial to mock things like, oh, Sky Daddy this and that. I don't think that gets anywhere. But I do think that if you have something that is completely falsified, right? Young Earth creation is falsified. There's no question about it. I mean, it is just wrong. There isn't a matter of theist versus not theist. There's nothing that we can say where we go, well, you know, there might be a young Earth creationist God. No, that God does not exist. Period. End of story. It is falsified. It's not going to happen. So I don't mind mocking those kinds of beliefs, right? Just like the flat Earth, we mock them because we know that it's falsified. But the God concept as a whole, that is not falsified, right? I mean, we don't have any way to say that gods don't exist, and it may not even be falsifiable, right?
Like, I think what would be also good is like this is actually working to a certain degree, but I think we need as a culture to do better with the schooling. Because nowadays people are at an ever increasing rate are getting out of young Earth creationism because they go to colleges, they listen to a biology teacher, they learn it, and some of them give up their religion because of that, and some don't. Um, I do always, I've said it on Twitter all the time. I said if your belief in God hinges on the Earth being 6,000 years old, then by all means become an atheist. You know.
Yeah, no, I'm okay with that, right? I mean, if people think that if their belief is contingent upon the Earth being young, and they find out that the Earth is old, they want to really leave religion and become atheists. That's fine, right? I got no issue with that. A lot of people do that, right? They feel like they've been lied to their entire lives. Now, it doesn't always happen that way. Wayne Fillmore left young Earth creationism, but he did not leave his faith. He still believes in Christianity, right? So either way, I don't have an agenda as far as what they believe, but I want people to have beliefs that are non-harmful, and I want beliefs that be true as much as possible, right? And I can't evaluate their God belief. I can't evaluate the belief that the Earth is young, right? That's something we can actually address. But I want to address the harm caused by beliefs because we have these religious freedoms, because we have them greater than any other country, maybe with the exception of Europe in some degree, because Europe allows a lot of Islam stuff to go on, which causes harm. Then how do we balance that? I'm still waiting for a way of having the benefit of having the freedom to have religion, because again, we can't just get rid of it as a whole, but say to people, look, you have the right to do this, but it is wrong, and we need to like fight against it. And I'm finding it difficult to walk that line.
Well, I want to stick with the creationist argument for
Sure.
a moment here, because that actually has made its way into public schools through.
Yes.
It's in a number of states right now. This has gone up to, as far as I know, the state Supreme Court level. I'm not sure if it's actually gone up into federal appellate courts or even to the United States Supreme Court. But at this point, we're teaching mythology in a science class, and that is harmful. And that needs to be stopped. We should not be allowing these evangelical zealots to push their religious views in our science class. If you're in a private school, then go for it. You know, if you're in a private religious school, I have no problem with that because you're paying for that with your own money. But because my tax dollars are going to support the schools in my area, I don't want that kind of bullshit being taught to the children in my area.
Well, but should we allow that harm? Should parents be allowed to teach things that are demonstrably false to their children?
In their own home, yes.
In their own home, yeah, sure. But I mean, even I'm talking about in a private school.
Ooh.
I mean,
It's a school. I mean, it may not be a public school. And again, I'm going on a limb here. I'm throwing this out there because I don't want to like have people say, well, Steve's against, teaching these things in private school. I'm not saying that. I'm just arguing, is it something we need to evaluate? Because if you have a private school yeah, they don't have any academic standards. Like again, with
Well,
Shannon's
well,
on her crusade for the A&B Christian counseling thing, they have no standards there. But does that mean we should allow it? Should we say to these private schools, hey, look you know what, you don't have you don't have to teach evolution, but you can't teach something that's false.
well, see, we have to work within the construct of the First Amendment, which says that the government cannot, pick and choose religious winners in a very, very vague sense. The government cannot create any laws favoring religion or hindering the free practice thereof. So, if people want to learn about, biblical creation in their own home, in their church, in their Christian school, that's fine because that's being kept private. That is not being out into the public sector. So the government cannot say, okay, well, you can't do this in your school because of the First Amendment. So we would have to drastically alter that one clause in the First Amendment in order to be able to,
Well,
do something.
I don't know. I'm not quite sure we do. Again, if something is demonstrably false, right?
Right.
What is and is not then covered under religious freedom?
Well, look at the Church of Scientology.
Well, but I don't think that's a church. I don't
Neither
recognize
do
it as a
I.
church. Nor does many other countries. Right?
No,
Um,
that's go ahead.
would it be? Do you think it would be ethical by our let's say First Amendment to require that any school, let's say, or that wanted to call themselves a school, a place of education, have to put some kind of like on cigarettes they have a warning label, hey, this can cause cancer. What if you had to teach, if you wanted to teach creationism in your school, that by the way, none of this is backed by the scientific consensus, just so you know.
Yeah, I mean, here's my thing that I would think about is like, I think that with private schools, eventually, like you should do is you should have competition between them, like how we do with a lot of things. Like if we compete with them, and if you have basically one school that teaches young Earth creationism, and you have another school that teaches evolution, and you find out that the school that's teaching evolution is doing way better in every aspect, people are going to say, am I really going to spend all this money when I can go to this other school that's demonstrably better? So I think that would be one thing. That's how we sort of deal with any private kind of thing, is where we allow competition between them, so they can, so, hopefully they can have a better outcome come out of it. I would say personally, like, I'm
But
fine with whatever they teach in the private schools. However, I don't, just because I'm fine with them teaching it, that's not mean I don't encourage people to give it bad reviews, to tell it that it's a crock and stuff like that. You're perfectly allowed to do that. It's, you have the right to, as long as you're not like going to the school and throwing rocks through the windows, or,
my
if you're
my
just
question
peacefully
my question
protesting it,
though,
and you're just
sorry.
complaining about it, that's perfectly fine.
My question though is, you said that you can just create competition for this school, but if someone, I mean, I think that the draw of a young Earth creationist school is that they're teaching young Earth creationism. So
Correct.
the only way you can create competition for that school is to set up another young Earth creationist school. That doesn't really make the ideas have to compete.
Yeah, I mean, actual public schools are not in competition with private schools. That is the correct information to put out. And by the way, this might be of interest to you. This is funny. I told these guys before we went on air, but there's another little thing that added on this. So I had asked Cy 10 if he wanted to come in, right? And Cy 10 said something along the lines of, he's on the road right now, but he's in Florida. He's like, you're in Florida, aren't you? Where about? And I'm like, no, I'm in California, but close. And he said, well, how did I get Florida? He's like, I must have confused you with SJ. And I'm like, yeah, because people confuse S.J. Thomason and I all the time. We're so much like each other. I get it. I get that, Cy. Oh, I'm rolling here. I'm like, really, Cy? How the hell did you confuse me with S.J. Thomason?
It's actually
Oh,
funny because I've actually
God,
talked
that's
to
hilarious.
SJ and I said, oh, your school isn't really that far from where I live. We live, like, if I wanted to walk over there, it'd only be like, maybe like, I mean, I wouldn't walk there, but if I was taking a bus, it would only be like an hour and a half to 2 hours to get there. So it's not
So
even
about
that
20
big.
miles.
Yeah,
So,
about
somebody,
that.
somebody said in the live chat, Kiwisa said, I think, truthfully speaking, I think private schools should not be allowed. And I'm wondering if that's something that we should discuss. I mean, again, they're schools, right? And to me, school implies education, right? And if you have a public school that, if you want to teach something that is questionable as far as religion, I get the religious freedom for that. But I do not see how it is ethically or morally sound to say we should allow people to demonstrably teach people things that, especially kids, that we know is false, right? There's not even a matter of it. It's not something that we just say, hey, these are just beliefs, right? You know, you can teach somebody that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Okay. But what we can say is the earth is not 7,000 years old. That is something that is demonstrable in science. So at that point,
And
do we
it's
step
not
in and just
flat.
say that you can't teach this kind of stuff? You can't teach stuff we have shown to be wrong.
I actually have an idea on that. What if, okay, if you're like right now, we require kids to get educated, right? They have to be in school. What if that requirement was only fulfilled at an accredited school? So you could, in your own time, educate your kid on the side in a private school on young Earth creationism if you want. But that kid is required by law to be in a school that's going to also be teaching them science. Then there's at least something competing in their mind.
Yeah, that's a step in the right direction, right?
Think of,
I'm
yeah, I
okay
mean, I
with
could
it.
see
More
that.
okay with that at least.
I mean, it would at least be an attempt.
Yeah, but the reason I'm saying this is because if not, you can put anything under the umbrella of religion, right? I can say,
And
hey, you know
that's
what? I know people say this is false. I can say the Earth was created last week, but you know what? This is my religious belief. So you can incorporate anything under that clause of religious freedom, and I think that is not the intent of the forefathers when they had come up with this separation of church and state. It wasn't to allow people to say, I believe all these really inane, egregious things, and then say, well, you know what, this is my religious freedom. That was not
Well,
the
I mean,
intent. No offense to the Dudism here, but obviously stuff like Dudism was not intended by the forefathers. It's just a natural outcropping of it that has been allowed because of a wide, very broad way of interpreting religious freedom,
exactly.
right?
And that's
well, I
why we
mean,
have
if we're
cults
going
like
to like,
Scientology coming up. That's why we have,
Yes.
cults like, the Watchtower
But see,
Society,
yours is
fucking
innocuous,
Jehovah's
right?
Witnesses.
Dudism is innocuous. Oh, excuse me, is innocuous. But when you're looking at Scientology, that is not. That is a harmful
Yes.
outcropping of this
Yes.
too broad of interpretation of religious freedom.
And they're getting away with so much shit. I mean, they are kidnapping, they are falsely imprisoning, and, depending on, various stories that you hear from people who have actually had to escape the church, not just leave it, but fucking escape. Yeah, they're being beat, they're being tortured, they're being forced to crawl around on their hands and knees on thick, rough industrial carpet for hours on end until they bleed. I mean,
yeah,
how the
How is that
fuck is
religious?
that?
Yeah,
Exactly.
how does that even remotely qualify as something under religious guise?
I
I
don't
don't know.
know.
Like
I
many
honestly don't
many
know
countries don't even
because
consider it a religion; they consider it a cult.
what was that?
Some countries, like I think Switzerland, I'm not sure, but a lot of I think it's either Switzerland or Germany or something like that, where they don't even consider it a religion; they consider it like a cult,
And I
and
think
it's
at one
required to pay taxes and stuff like that.
And that's
Um,
probably why they don't have a real strong base in those countries, because L. Ron Hubbard's whole thing was not paying taxes. He
well,
spent
yeah,
God knows how many millions of dollars over the decades fighting and harassing the United States government just to get tax exempt status so that they could finally, hold it up and say, hey, we're now tax exempt. We are recognized by the government as a religion. And the only reason why they were able to do that is because the IRS got tired of all the goddamn lawsuits that were basically frivolous. And the
no,
government
yeah,
finally said, you know what, it's cheaper just to let you have your way.
Yeah, I think that was a bad mistake.
Yes.
I really do. I think they should have fought that out because it opened the door for too much similar things. Sarah B at $5. What about public schools where all the children have smartphones and access to pornography? Is that more of an issue than a religion? That's an issue. Yeah, that's not a religious thing. I'm all for libraries and I'm all for computer access, but there has to be limitations. I'm sorry, you don't have a right to go to a library to watch porn. There's no right that you have bestowed to you by the Constitution for that. I'm sorry. This very, very liberal interpretation of a lot of these things, I disagree with. I really do. And I'm a First Amendment advocate. I'm a Second Amendment advocate. Certainly Fourth and Fifth Amendments. And yet, even I say, look, we have to have a line of demarcation here. We have to have a point where we say this is a way too broad interpretation.
I don't like how it's sort of implied as a public school thing only, because I know plenty of private schools where you have access to cell phones and you have access to all that sort of thing as well. Like, as just in the super chat, I don't like how they said how it's a public school thing. It's not just public schools. Private schools can just be as bad as private, unless they specifically make sure you have no technology at all.
So, Steve, are you telling me that in the First Amendment, it doesn't say the government shall not, impede my right to look at lewd imagery on the internet?
Yeah, believe it or not, it doesn't have that. Matter of fact, I could probably venture a guess that when the forefathers came up with that, the concept of pornography wasn't even a thing, right? I mean, the closest they would probably have was some kind of very
Burlesque shows,
sepia tonage thing where you're like, is that a nipple? I think that's a nipple. We have nipple. Yes. Go George. Yes, Lincoln. Yes. High five.
Well, no, Thomas just had slaves.
Oh.
That was just his thing.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I think what the problem is really when it comes down to, if you actually look at the history of the Constitution, which I looked up Mark David Hall. He's a leading professor on this sort of stuff, where he went into the history of it, and it's actually pretty funny when you look into it. It's like the First Amendment was deeply something that the religious people were wanted, because back then, because the Church of England was persecuted, like they were making it so that it was harder for other groups to practice their religious beliefs. So when they came over here, they were saying, all right, look, we want to be able to practice our religious beliefs. Are you not going to make a national church? And the Thomas Jefferson, he said there is a wall of separation between church and state with the Danbury Baptists. What people don't often bring up is that his saying of the hedge between the separation of church and state actually came from the Baptists. That's how they knew it, because he looked up one of their founders, and he had mentioned it. And so it was very much the religious people that were fighting for the First Amendment, to separate church from state.
Well,
Jefferson, he said that he didn't think that the First Amendment went far enough, because he actually wanted to, build a wall of separation between church and state, but he ultimately had to settle on the compromise that we ended up with.
Yeah. And look, I'm for separation of church and state, and I think that any rational theist would want one as well.
Surprising.
Because think about this, though. Think if you're a theist, right? Why would you want anything but a separation of church and state? Yes, I understand you want to have your own theocracy. I get that narrative. However, the likelihood of your theocracy being one implemented in the country they're in versus somebody else's theocracy is very slim. So why take the chance, right? Because all these people are pushing for what they want, right? Even have people like pushing for Islam in America, right? If they wanted to implement Sharia law all over the place, the Christians would be going like, oh, wait a minute. No. We don't want that as a theocracy, right?
Well, I mean, another thing is, like, I think people need to realize is that also it's like, I find that with certain things, as long as they're not like specialty favoring one religion over the other, is like they say, okay, you can have, like they say Christians, you're allowed to do like X activity here in public, but however, if Muslims want to come and do an X activity there, we have to allow them as well. It's not favoring any one religion in that sense, because
they've done that with Satanism, right? I mean, with the whole statue of Bahamut.
Well, yeah.
Same principle.
Well, I mean, the Church of Satan actually qualifies for tax exemption, but they don't do it.
I learned that recently. Yeah, that's crazy.
We were featured on their webpage at one time. We were actually on the Church of Satan's webpage when we had interviewed Derek Deicide, actually.
That's lovely.
By the way, I don't know who this person is. eFire Sky messaged me. I don't know who you are. So,
Hi, Steve.
do you guys know who he is? I'm only letting people in that I know or can validate, and that the cameras are turned off. So,
And
I'm
that
pretty new to the community, so I don't know anyone.
yeah,
here.
I know this dickwad that's coming in. Hey, Jim.
I just wanted to say in the lull in the conversation, hi, Steve. Haven't talked to you in a while.
Is that Yada?
Yep.
Yeah, what's up, dude? It's been a while. Yeah, I know. A lot of stuff just gets in the way. So you're always welcome to my hangouts, though.
I'm more an audience member, anyways. I just want to tell you, Zoom works on my old computer. So
it is a great program. It's very easy to use. I like the way it streams. You don't need an encoder with it. You don't need OBS or XSplit. You can actually stream directly from Zoom. You can have a multitude of people in the Hangout. But we have the paid service, so that's why. I don't know about the free service. If somebody can tell me if you can stream from the free service, let me know. Jim, what happened to you? You got muted. I didn't mute you.
You cannot stream from the free service, unfortunately. Okay. But you can join another person's stream. You just can't start one yourself.
Why can't we see your beautiful mug?
I am out tending to horses. I got 8 horses in today that I weren't supposed to be in until next weekend, and I had to rush to the store to get medications and vaccinations and get a pen ready for quarantine. So I've been busy all freaking day.
Well, you missed the first half, so you want to weigh on it as you get up to date on the topic, because we're talking about basically religious freedoms and the extent that they should allow them to have religious freedoms, and knowing full well that there are harms and benefits of religion. Now, I'm not going to say that everything is harmful about religion. There are some benefits out there, but I think that possibly there's an argument to be had that even those benefits can be replaced by humanism. I understand that argument. I really do. But what can't really, or what won't be, or shouldn't be replaced, is the fact that we don't want the harm to be out there, right? And there's a lot of things about religion that are harmful. We have to face those realities. So where do we draw the line to say, look, we want to have religious freedoms, but at the same time, we don't want to have the child deaths. We don't want to have the scams that are going on with the educational system, like the A and B Christian counseling thing. We don't want to have groups like Scientology. We don't want everything to be under this umbrella of religion saying, you know what, I can teach my kids in a private school that the earth is 7,000 years old because that's my religious freedom to do so. No, I'm getting to the point where I'm really saying, no, I don't think that is a fair argument any longer to say we can teach something that is demonstrably false. That's not education.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And as far as where we draw the line, I think it's very simple where we draw the line. We draw the line where harm, where your religious beliefs ultimately result in the harm of somebody else. But the only problem therein lies is, in my opinion, inarguably the worst harm that is done by religion is done to the children of the religious. Indoctrination, to me, is the most abhorrent a part of religion, is that forcing these beliefs onto your children. So, I mean, in my perfect world, nobody would be indoctrinating their children. I mean, with these harmful beliefs. Now, I can understand, somebody indoctrinating somebody being misled because because all the information out there for a certain thing is bad. But when it comes to something like that operates on unverifiable evidence like religion, then indoctrination can take many forms depending on what ideologies you're implementing into that.
Well, I mean, if you actually look into some of the literature on it, it's like one of probably the most dominant religion, because they've actually looked at, they've told the younger generation about who identify as Christians what they exactly believe. And it's actually gotten to the point where they actually just call it, I'm trying to remember the term, moral therapeutic deism, where they have basically, they don't really fit the mold of anything that we would consider Christianity in the sense, but they just happen to identify as Christians because cultural reasons, and they just happen to have a vague list of beliefs that they have regarding it.
But is that what we incorporate to mean religious freedom? I mean, if you have some vague cultural reference, Again, that leads into things like Scientology. We all know that's not a real religion, right? We all agree that's a scam.
Well, and in the name itself, religious freedom. I mean, in the name itself, you're not applying any boundaries to what religion is. So, I mean, if you want to have religious freedom and you're wanting to limit these harmful beliefs, I mean those are two completely contradictory concepts and schemas. You're not going to be able to get one with the other present.
Well, I agree with that. That's the point. I mean, it's the same thing.
Right.
You can't have 100% security and 100% freedom, right? You have to sacrifice some freedom to have security. You have to sacrifice some security to have freedom. That's the way of the beast, right?
Right. Well, I mean, what you're talking about is implementing some sort of religious regulation or some sort of religious checks and balances that say, okay, you believe this, and if it fits these moral and ethical parameters that we've decided, you know, that you're not inundating anybody else with your ideology, and that you are like Christopher Hitchens says, you know, religion is their favorite toy. You can't take it away. But all that I ask, and all that Christopher Hitchens asked, was that you play with those toys in your home, and you play with those toys with people who want to play with your toys. You don't tell me that I had to play with your toys, and you don't tell my kids that they had to play with your toys. You don't bring your toys into school, and you don't bring your toys into a government facility. And as long as they are playing with their toys, and they're not telling somebody else, hey, if you don't play with my toy, you're going to hell, then fine.
No, I've heard his analogy on that, and I hate to say it, I actually really kind of agree with it. And the reason being is that, one, religious freedoms do start at home, right? I mean, you can't be the thought police, and you can't be the police to say this is what you can and cannot do in your own dwelling, right? That's never going to happen, right? People have the right to do what they want, but when it extends into a cultural, societal realm, when you're saying, hey, let's build these churches, and these churches are going to preach something that we know is demonstrably untrue. I like what you said. You said something along the lines of having an ethical and moral review, or standard, right? I think was the word you used.
Yeah.
And by the way, guess what? That's philosophy, people. Yeah, philosophy. That's not science, right? So philosophy of the efficacy of these issues, and maybe they need to set up some kind of theological review board or something along the lines, because I think they're allowing for too much, and I am moving my needle towards that. Again, it's not anti-theism. I don't want to say that, so I got to think of another term for it.
Anti-religion.
So
anti-harms of religion, right? You know, anti-harms of religion.
So to kind of put this whole idea into perspective, you know, you can take something that has been demonstrably harmful to our society, something like the Second Amendment, like the open right for everybody to own weapons. That is not a true Second Amendment, because there are so many regulations on it. You have to be certified and have a permit for a certain level, and so on and so forth. But I digress. But my question is something as crucial, as fundamental and pivotal in the formation of our country as the First Amendment, specifically the freedom of religion, which is the entire reason that the United States was founded. I mean, how do you go about changing that? Because in order to implement any sorts of checks and balances, you would have to first amend the First Amendment.
And that's something that I brought up earlier. It turns into a slippery slope.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have people who are implementing the checks and balances. Like, we have to ask ourselves, like, who are we going to trust to say, you know, what is harmful and what isn't harmful? Like, what sociological and what psychological implementations are we going to use in discovering these things? You know, is there anyone? And another question, even bigger question, is there any one algorithm that can be all encompassing for all religions?
No, and I don't think it's an algorithm. I don't think it's a one size fits all. But we always give the ability to make these decisions to people. We have judges, right? We have doctors that make medical decisions. We have people looking at the Second Amendment and going, hey, you know what? The right to bear arms. Or, you know what? You can't own a nuclear weapon, right? But hey, that's my Second Amendment right. I can own a nuclear weapon, right? I have a right to protect myself against all enemies, foreign, domestic.
But you don't.
But that's because people haven't interpreted these things. People have said this is where we draw the line. So why is it any different with religious things? Why can't people draw the line and say, look, these things are false. We know them to be false. The Earth is not flat. The Earth is not 7,000 years. You cannot teach these things in a private school. What if I wanted if I want to start a private school, Jim, and I said, I want to start my child with the belief that the Earth is flat. So I'm going to start a private school, and we're going to teach children that the Earth is flat. Most people would probably go, hey, wait a minute. No, that's not, hang on. People would be like, no, you can't do that, right? No, but that's my religious freedom. I don't know why it hasn't happened yet. I'm hoping I'm not getting anybody some bad ideas.
Well, it's like the difference. Oh, you go.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that's what I was saying, like with the algorithm, with no system of checks and balances being able to be all encompassing, because all it takes is for somebody to make up a religion that does not fit those parameters that can operate outside of it, and boom, they immediately have a loophole that is justified.
Well, I mean, no one size fits all. Again, you can't just by fiat say, look, no system's perfect. There, you can't do anything, right? We all agree that no one system's perfect, but that doesn't mean we don't have checks and balances. That means we don't have review boards for certain things.
Right, but I mean, think about all of the medical procedures and psychological procedures and the different types of therapies that professionals are licensed for, but that are actually things that we don't fully understand how they operate. And these are all developing fields of science. Whatever sort of thing that we would implement in this scenario, in these circumstances, it would have to be something that is organic, something that is evolving, and something that is that will always be relevant. I mean, whether it's 100 years from now or 400 years from now.
Brass wanted to say something real quick. Go ahead. And by the way, real quick, people can call in the live chat. I think we tested it the other day. It doesn't show your phone number, or you can join by adding the link in the video description to Zoom and come in that way, or just click on it, and that should work as well. But you can call in from your phone if you got questions. Give it a shot. We'd like to see people call in to this stuff. But go ahead, Brass.
Yeah. I was going to say, a lot of it gets talks into checks and balances, but if, like, I was going back to Mark David Hall, when you actually look in the history of that's actually, it bears from a religious concept. Because what the founding fathers got that idea from was the idea that men were sinful. And therefore, you needed check and balances to maintain that because they were sinful. Which, I believe it was like James Madison said, if all men were angels, they wouldn't need government.
Well, I think that if all men could, have ethical things and guide their own morality, we probably wouldn't need any kind of government, right? I mean, that's an idealized society. That's an idealistic society that just will never work because that's not human nature. We as humans could never exist in that kind of idealized state. Well, Sabia, $5. Is supporting identity groups like feminism and others unconstitutional because my freedom of speech, use of words needs to be modified or not existent?
No, because I don't really believe that's harmful.
Yeah, I don't problem. There's harms and benefits in any group for the most part. I mean, every group, no matter how vile they are, probably espouses one thing that most people would go, okay, at least I would agree with that. But feminism is one of those things that depends on what they mean by feminism. It depends on what degree of feminism, right? But I would never say I never say we should constitutionally ban feminism. That would make no sense.
Well, what we could do, and I don't know how. I mean, this is gonna take the conversation on a slightly different path. But I mean, we can always remove that barrier between church and state, and force these religions to abide by government legislature. And that would be one way to regulate it. But at the same time, you would have religious influence in government.
Yeah, and that's the main concern I have with this whole let's tax the churches, right? People are like, oh, we got to tax the churches, and I keep trying to explain to people, look at
dumb as shit.
Here's the argument that I have. The problem with taxing the churches is that people are not thinking this through. If they repeal the Johnson Amendment, if they allow churches to be non-tax exempt, now they can spend money to get their persons into politics, and they could. The landscape of politics would change as we know it, right?
But they're already doing that.
No, they
Look
have
at how-
found. Well, hang on. They found loopholes to do it, but they still. But we can close those loopholes and we can catch those things, right? We can say you are not allowed to do this, and churches have lost their tax exempt status because of it, right? But if we just carte blanche say, you know what, we are going to tax you now, and all you churches now can be involved in the political process, that's going to be a minefield, and I think
It's more of
that's
a
not where it's
slight
leading.
adjustment thing, I
And
guess.
What?
Because
and what people don't take into consideration with that is that who do you think is really going to be hurt by that? You think the big like mega churches are going to be the people that you'd want to see get hurt, like the big mega churches are going to feel the brunt of that?
Oh, I would love to
No.
see
Right,
Yellowstone
exactly.
feel the fucking
Like
full
the people
brunt
that
of
would
that.
get hurt the most would be like let's say a church in the ghetto, which is actually doing a good job
Mm-hmm.
at giving people an outlet, so they're not being in a gang and shooting up places.
Right.
Yeah, I
That
know.
are
Like I said,
actually
there's
having
always benefits.
food,
Sure.
yeah, they're actually having food drives and clothing and shelters and all this other stuff. I mean, most of these drives and stuff that you see and these helping the homeless and everything, these are put on and sponsored by these local community churches. And these local community churches, in my experience, even as a theist, they are much more willing and much more they're very much so in it to help people, whereas the people in these mega churches, they're in it specifically to see how much of their floors they can cover in red carpet.
And that's a distinction to be made. And thank you for the 2 pounds, Mr. Dinvader. I think that's a huge distinction to be made. My concern is more with the mega churches, right? My concerns are with these large church organizations.
Yeah.
I have no issue with the little corner, Baptist church that has, a small congregation and, they want to feed the homeless and have food drives, all for that kind of stuff, right? I mean, but I've actually seen atheists would go, oh, you know what? I wouldn't even help those churches with their food drive because I don't want to be associated with them. I'm like, you're being an idiot, right? I mean, if a church is having a food drive and they ask for help, I think atheists should go help them out, right? Yeah. I really honestly think they should. I've worked in food banks before.
Yeah, I mean, I've done that. I've worked with churches before.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm currently fundraising through a Christian organization, I'm pretty sure. So there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. So I don't want people to get the impression that I'm trying to say that we need to eliminate that aspect of religion. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination.
Would it be easier to sort of connect it less to their status as a religion and more to their status as a community or charitable sort of organization?
Well, that's kind of what we already did. I mean, because the whole point of them not paying taxes is because they had at one point in history proven themselves to be a benefit to society, to those who can't help themselves, to the widows, to the orphans, and to the poor. And at one time these church doors were open, but now you can hardly find a single church in the United States whose doors are not locked 6 days out of the week with a homeless person sleeping on the streets within a mile of it.
So you think it's a case of more checks and balances basically coming in and making sure that...
Well, this is just a pure case of complacency, both on the church's part and even more so on the government's part for not implementing these checks and balances, because it said, oh, they've been doing good for this long and we haven't done this, so we're not going to do it, and completely just ignore and overlook the entire reason that they don't pay taxes in the first place. And in my opinion, if they're not providing these resources and these amenities to the helpless, I mean, like they said they were, and the whole reason that they're verified and not paying taxes, then I believe that they should be penalized, not necessarily forced to pay taxes, but I believe that they should be penalized, or maybe because I mean they are not free from being fined, right? So maybe we can implement some sort of a fine or some sort of a fee for these churches who are not doing their non-taxly duties.
Well, I think there needs to be oversight, though. I mean, here's the thing with most churches, there's a lot of money to be handled, right? And a lot of that money goes to overhead. Some of it goes to paying the lay clergy. But a lot of it is actually going to misappropriation. Every time I've heard scandals, it's always because of misappropriations of funds, right? If the funding was supposed to go to just the operation of the church, lay clergy, and then the rest to feeding the homeless and to provide shelter and that kind of stuff. That'd be great, but that's not what I'm seeing in a lot of these churches, right? I mean, people are making these into businesses, and that's not the intent of a 501c3.
Right.
No, and
That's what really gets me, I'd say. It's just like in New Zealand, we have it. We've got Destiny Church here, and it's basically a business being run, and it's awful because they prey on minorities who have a culture of religion and are from poorer parts of the country, and they basically take all their money. And the dude who is the founder of the church drives around in these nice ass cars and takes flights to his mansions all over.
Right? Is that something we should go after then? Because that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's something I think that crosses a line of religious freedom at that point. That's abuse.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, taxing the church would not really, like, we all don't really like the big mega churches, but they wouldn't be in the slightest bit inconvenienced by that.
No, it would be the small churches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would be worse because you would get a bunch of communities that very much rely on the churches for whatever reason, for maybe some cultural, and it's a way of they bond together in the community. You would get more of a problem from those than you would get like the Joel Osteens and the other ones. They're completely fine.
I have a question for you guys, kind of on topic here. So, my wife, for instance, before we met, was having problems leaving her husband, and we're not going to get into all that, but the church that she belonged to at the time basically told her that, we could help you out more financially if you were actually, coming into church more often. Now, at the time, she couldn't actually bring her kid into church because of low immune system and stuff like that. But this was a very common practice in the church where, yeah, we'll help you out, but we really need to see you coming into church more often to get the financial help that you need.
Oh, that bugs me. That's not altruistic.
Right.
Well, I mean,
right. So what would you guys do about that? What do you guys think should be done about that?
Okay,
I think
if I can,
there should be complaints done about it, but I think there should be complaints about it. However, it's like a church, like any other places, like, I'm trying to word it, like, they register as like a charity, so they have to give a certain amount, or they have to do something that's resembling a charity to, like, they have to go to a certain extent in order to get their tax exemption.
No, they don't. There is no oversight. There is nobody looking over their shoulder saying, are you spending this money on what you're supposed to be?
I mean, generally, we do know this, like, we do know, like, from multiple studies, like, America, when it comes to charity, America is the top nation with it, like the top country that does charity. And a lot of that does come from the churches. So, I mean, I believe Godless Cranium was one that said how religion in America is like worth like, I don't know, like $1.2 trillion or something like that. And I said, even if only 1% of that money actually goes to charities, that's still more than pretty much any secular organization can really hope to compete with.
Yeah. Like, so when I was a preacher, we had our own finance committee, like for our church, and they were basically just a board of church members of clergy that their sole position was to delegate how we spend the church funds. And, we, budgeted and everything like that. And we would develop a budget for the year and, outline the different expenditures for each line item in the budget. And there were certain people on the board who were responsible for each subcategory, I guess, of financial spending. But the only problem there is like that is your only checks and balance. I mean, unless something gets leaked from the inside from your finance committee, nobody's going to know what you spend it on unless you divulge that information. But the problem here lies, like you were saying, you're saying that, if your wife doesn't come to church more. My grandmother, I found out that she was having to go to a food bank twice a week, because one in her town, and then go to another town and get one because the first one didn't give her enough groceries, because her church said that if she did not start tithing more, that they were not going to allow her to be the choir leader. She was the choir leader in church. And they said that because she was not paying her 10% tithes and she's on a fixed Social Security income, that she's not doing her godly duty, so therefore she cannot be in a godly position or in a church position like that. So we have these harmful things that religion does that are